Our guest on this program is Mr. Nelson George, black music editor at Billboard magazine and author of the highly acclaimed book, The Death of Rhythm and Blues. Mr. George, in my opening, I mentioned Ruth Brown, very famous black singer back in the 40s and 50s, Charles Brown, same period, and Fats Domino. Now, I said White Shadow. I think they were called covers, were they not?
Absolutely. The phrase was cover versions. And what would happen is that a particular song would do well on the then sepia or R&B chart. The artist would do well. Ruth Brown was one an example. Fats Domino, Little Richard, in fact, as well. And they want to market this song would be a good song. How can we market this to white America without offending them with the idea of having to listen to a white record or a black artist for that matter? So they would get a Patti Page to do a Ruth Brown record, or Pat Boone. In fact, Pat Boone's entire career is built on the idea of covering songs by Fats Domino and Little Richard. I mean, his whole basis now, he's the man in the white buck shoes and all that other stuff. He's Mr. America. But then the roots of his career begin with covering black music and basically whitewashing it. So that's what the phrase cover version comes from, them covering these songs that were popular with black America.
Mr. George, in your book, it has a tremendous amount of research, and I enjoyed and learned a lot from it. One of the things that you define, and I've rarely seen defined, is actually what rhythm and blues is. And maybe I should say what rhythm and blues was, because rhythm and blues, this one day, we all went to bed at night, and it was rhythm and blues. We got up the next morning, and they told us it was rock and roll. Can you help me understand what it is, or what it was, or what really is now?
Well, rhythm and blues is a phrase that came up post-World War II. It was a great tumult in black America and in black music. You had all the soldiers coming home from World War II. You had a whole new outlook in black America trying to push forward in civil rights in a broader sense. Musically, what happened is that swing, the big band era, really gave way to a whole other group of sounds. Instead of just having the big bands, you had solo singers. In white war, you had Frank Sinatra breaking away from the big bands. You had singers like Perry Como. All of them are offshoots of the big band era, okay? In black America, you had this phenomenon of, well, you had numbers. You had the gospel singers. You had sort of quartets. There used to be gospel choirs, smaller quartets, vocal groups like the Dominoes. The Drifters began becoming popular. You had solo singers like Ruth Brown, Charles Brown, many solo singers. You had, most importantly, and it's changed from swing, the big band, to smaller rhythm sections. You had, instead of having a large horn section, a lot of saxophones, you'd have one sax, maybe two sax, a horn section, maybe a trombone, maybe four pieces. You'd have a bass player, drummer, guitar player. And so the rhythm section became more and more prominent. Technology had a lot to do with this, because you began to see the introduction of the electric bass and electric guitar, which meant that the actual sound of the bass and guitar was louder, more forefront. So the reason horns basically couldn't keep up with us. I mean, Quincy Jones said this to me, that when the electric bass and electric guitar came in, the horn sections really had to take a back seat, because the bass and the guitar had such personality now, had such presence, that the rhythm section became stronger. All of these factors, musical factors, were going around. What do we call it? Well, up until that time, there'd been sepia, there'd been race music, there'd been all of these terms for the music. Somehow this idea of rhythm, the idea that rhythm was becoming more prominent in the music. The dance grooves became more emphatic. So rhythm came up. But the basic subject matter, the blues, the idea of a man or a woman talking about their life, was still there. So they became merged together as rhythm and blues, or rhythm in blues, however way you want to look at it. And this became a catch-all phrase for a number of different trends in black American music.
Now, Louis Jordan was probably the most prominent band around, wasn't he, in the 40s and 50s? I think one time on the chart, out of 5 songs, four of them were Louis Jordan.
Louis Jordan is one of the great underappreciated geniuses of black American music, of American music, forget black American music. He's the great transition from the era of Cab Calloway's to the era of James Brown. He was a showman. He was very, very funny. He wrote songs, Caledonia, What Makes Your Big Head So Hard, Saturday Night Fish Fry. He had a wonderful way of using colloquial Southern phraseology for an urban experience. He was like the bridge between that era when most blacks still lived in the South, and moving north. His songs really were a wonderful way of mixing the two in terms of how he dealt with his lyrics. Musically, He was the man who really made this whole smaller rhythm section idea, the idea of smaller horn section, really work. In fact, if you ever hear Chuck Berry interviewed, in the rare times he'll talk to reporters, the only person you can get him to really acknowledge as an influence is Louis Jordan. If you listen to a Louis Jordan song like Caledonia, you listen to a Chuck Berry song, the same kind of humor, same kind of images in it. Also, musically, Chuck Berry's guitar sound, which, you know, quote unquote, is the start of rock and roll. There's a guy named Carl Hogan, who was the guitar player for Louis Jordan. And you can hear almost the same lines, guitar lines on his records. So Louis Jordan is like a major, major figure.
Now, during that time, and I guess young blacks will have a hard time even understanding this, there were no black radio stations.
Well, they were just starting. Well,
there were very, very few.
Exactly.
Black people didn't hear rhythm and blues on the radio as they do now. They heard it on jukeboxes.
Oh, yeah, the jukebox was the key transition. First, it was black. If you wanted to hear black music and knew about it coming up, you'd have to read the black newspaper first. The jukeboxes came and they were the transition. In fact, the reason rhythm and blues, one of the reasons that rhythm and blues became popular and recorded by recording companies was because blacks were not using the jukeboxes. They would get the jukebox and there'd be some Pavarotti or something like that on there, or some Gene Krupa. Well, they might dig a little bit, but bottom line, it wasn't any music for them, and they weren't using them. How do we get these people to use these jukeboxes? That was the way the record business made money at that time. So these little independent labels began coming up. There's this remarkable period from like 1945 to 1950 when you saw explosion of record companies dealing with black music, rhythm and blues. LA, which we don't always think of as a black music center, had many, like Aladdin. God, there's so many labels out of there. Liberty. New York obviously had Atlantic Records, which came up. You saw black-owned record companies, which people don't really know about. Bobby Robinson had Enjoy Records uptown. There was a wonderful figure named Don Roby out of Houston, Texas, who was variously described as a gangster and a visionary, and probably was a little bit of both. He was like the big man. If you were in the Southwest, he owned one of the biggest, the Peacock Lounge, I believe was the biggest place in the Southwest. He had Peacock Records, Duke Peacock Records, and he had also a big management company in terms of managing and booking people.
Well,
so he had like a monopoly in that area.
When we did get to radio, and what era was this when we had the black disc jockey?
The black disc jockey came in about the same. See, what's great about this period in the late 40s, early 50s, is there's all these forces coming together to create sort of a world, what I call the rhythm and blues world. There were these clubs and or concert halls, the Apollo, the Howard in D.C., the Regal in Chicago, the Uptown in Philly. Every black city, every center where there were blacks, had their own one or two major venues. You had these radio stations begin to come up. You began to see white entrepreneurs saying, this community of blacks has so much money. How do we tap into it? Radio stations using black music. So the fact that these white entrepreneurs wanted to sell hair grease, wanted to sell furniture on long, bases where you have to put in $5 a day and $5 a week. You know that those kind of scams. All these things came together and it helped create black radio. Was an idea of, for example, the station KDIA in Memphis. They were really Memphis was like the key home for black people. That they made an estimation about the 40s that 60% of black people in America, if you had a radio station that could be reached because of the southern conflagration of blacks. So they built this radio station purely to appeal to this wide range of blacks, sell them stuff. So you saw black DJs get jobs in order to appeal to this black community. The first DJs, in fact, the first black DJs were not really very hip. They tended to be very straightforward, very kind of dry, What happened is that they discovered, there was a guy, in fact, in Chicago, Al Benson, the Midnight Gambler, I've heard him described both ways, who reportedly fractured the English language. He had a terrible, y'all come on down, and the kind of stuff that maybe today we'd be a little put back about. But then it was the first time black people had heard a black voice that sounded like them on the radio, and they just gravitated to it. And so around the country, you saw DJ after DJ come up at a very colloquial style. And that's when black radio began to get its power. It spoke the language of black America and voices in a way that we wanted to be talked to, the way we communicate and could feel that person that was talking to us. So the music came up, the rhythm and blues music came up, the DJs came up, the venues came up, and so you had this whole milieu world, the black music world. And that reflected also the black music world, the black world in general. We were quote unquote segregated from the mainstream. But in it, that was a great strength for our music and for ourselves. We were able to have venues. We had black people involved in management, black people owning record stores in the community. It was one of the strengths of segregation. I hate to say it, I mean, people might be offended by it, that it created a community, a sense of community, a sense of shared struggle. And the music reflected this, and the music created institutions that reflected this.
Mr. George, your book turns as much on marketing of music and entertainment as it does on segregation, desegregation, civil rights, or anything else. Let us go from how we got rhythm and blues and what it was and how it worked, the dynamics of it, which you've just given us, to how we got to where we are now. A Ruth Brown or a Charles Brown or a Fats Domino would make music out of their background, their heritage, out of the church, Aretha Franklin. Black people would understand it, they would consume it, they would hear black voices on radio, gravitate toward it, and therefore we had a full cycle. At some point in time, white America discovered rhythm and blues. Elvis Presley became the god of rock and roll.
Well, I would say, in a nutshell, if we wanted to look at a key transitional thing, it's the 60s, the era when we were really pushing forward civil rights. You saw an institution called Motown Records. You saw an artist like Aretha Franklin, who was at Atlantic Records. You saw them push across to a level of acceptance in white America that had never been done before. And they were on independent labels that were either owned by blacks or had a great many blacks involved in the actual marketing and selling of the music. In the early 70s, the major labels, when I say major, I mean the conglomerate labels, the CBSs, the Warner Brothers, the RCAs, the ABCs, said, how come they're making so much money on this stuff and we don't have any of it? Moreover, how are they making it? How do we get a piece of it? There's a very pivotal report that was done in 1971. It was commissioned by CBS Records, done by Harvard University. It's called the Harvard Report. And while it's not widely known throughout the industry, it was something that had a great impact. What it basically said is that the way to co-opt this marketplace is to hire black people, to get involved with black radio, and to sign up all these black artists. Now, on the surface, I think that was very good. I mean, it meant more exposure. A Michael Jackson, for example, was not possible without the marketing machine of a CBS behind him. On the other hand, it meant that a lot of institutions that had fueled the music's growth and were black controlled were now going to be co-opted, and they were. You saw talent raids on independent labels that were black owned to sign major stars. You saw black radio, in effect, romanced so that a smaller independent label could not compete anymore because of the money that a major label would pump into it. You saw places like the Apollo, the Regal, the Howard abandoned because they was more profitable for them now to play Madison Square Garden or someplace downtown away from black folks. You saw the major labels who didn't really care too much about mom and pop stores. They were about big dollars. So they had a deal, right? The new Michael Jackson record comes out. It'll be $9.95 at 125th Street, but it'll be $7.95 at Tower Records downtown. So the economic power of the conglomerates came to separate, to take what was good about the music and market it and shape it the way they wanted it shaped. The phrase crossover is a direct outgrowth of this period. The idea of crossover, basically, in its most benign sense, is we take something that's being popular here and we move it over here, which is fine. That's marketing. It's the manifestations of that have really hurt us. When you see the idea that a black artist may have to have a nose job, may get blue contact lenses, may lighten their skin. If you look at black entertainment television, you look at the videos. Have you ever noticed how many of the artists in those videos, the female leads, are light-skinned? That's nothing against light-skinned women. But to say that over and over again you see light-skinned with long hair, mulatto-looking women, and this goes across the board. This is marketing. This is crossover. Because maybe if we have a light-skinned lead, the thinking goes, that maybe this white person in Iowa won't feel as offended by the fact that this black man is singing this love song. These are the kind of ideas, insidiously enough, that have permeated the record industry. You look at the great black superstars that are out there right now. Almost none of them have a black manager. Very few of them even have really intense black advisorships. Most of their judgments are made purely on the basis of money. And if money is all it is, then this music is almost over. Because
why do you say that?
Because the idea of just doing things to make money leads you away. Because in America, to make money means just being as white as you can.
You're saying that black music is dead.
Not
because
did,
of marketing.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. The marketing and also this idea of what music constitutes. You listen to the radio. We all listen to the radio. You listen to record after record on a black radio station. You do not know who's singing. Okay? You can't tell the difference in the voice. You can't tell the difference in the tracks. The individuality of the music has been sapped out. I'll give you a graphic example. In 1988, you saw any number of female singers. They were light-skinned or slim, model-looking, very elaborate videos. Did not sing very well, but looked good. At the same time, you saw very few dark-skinned, Negroid. I mean, Ruth Brown. Ruth Brown was a heavy-set, sisterly-looking sister. Okay? You almost see no Ruth Browns getting signed by labels and no Ruth Browns getting exposure on radio and TV. And it's simple as that. I mean, it talks about that. That whole thing is turned around. When you see videos have such an insidious impact on young people looking at it, you see new musicians come up and say, well, if Prince did this, and he had Vanity, and he had Apollonia, then I got to get me an Apollonia and a Vanity now, too, for my video. Right?
All right, let me go to what they say.
Okay.
They will say to you, so what? You, black people, wanted to be a part of America. We brought you into America. The majority of Americans are white. And if you want to participate in this country and you want to get your share of the market, you got to do what the majority wants you to do. It just so happens that they're white.
I say to that black music has always sold to America in its greatest form. Aretha Franklin is still revered. Ray Charles, Chuck Berry, people who were powerful, strong, and black. And they sold tons of records. I think Anita Baker is a great example of that. I think Luther Vandross is a great example of that. I think there are artists who have the integrity, and I think it breeds longevity. When you have someone singing from the heart, singing from the soul.
Well, let's talk about your retro nouveau.
Okay.
All right, tell us. I said earlier what retro nouveau said. It's your term. I want you to define it. Tell us who retro nouveaux are and who they are not.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. What I meant by retro nouveau is that it's great when you see an artist who can take the traditions of the music, take it into contemporary sounds, contemporary production, and put it together. Anita Baker is my great example of that, but I think Luther Vandross fits in that. I think a man who people don't talk much about, Frankie Beverly Mays, who's a major cat who people don't acknowledge. Consistently, good music, quality music, doesn't follow fashion, but makes music that speaks from the soul, and you can listen to over and over again. The people who I really complain about, and what's really devastating to the music, is that the qualities of what makes a good black record have been hurt a great deal by this idea of crossover. Someone like Peabo Bryson, who was a great star in the 70s, wrote great love songs. Right now, he tried to become crossover. And he's really, I think we all know, no one listens to people right now.
Well, Mr. George, I said earlier, then that means that black music is dead. If black people are not producing music for black people, they're not producing music out of their heritage. Therefore, no one is producing music for black people. Does that not mean that black music in America is dead?
Well, I'll say this. I'll say what's one of the things that's really helped black music, and especially in the last 3-4 years, and I know it's something that's controversial, is rap music. Not necessarily just because it's rap. The brothers, they dress like brothers you see in the street. You may not like the way those brothers dress in the street, but they look like them. The audience loves them. They brought a street credibility back to the music, but moreover, they are beginning to affect the mainstream. So you see Keith Sweat. So you see Al B. Sure. So you see Bobby Brown. Young men, strong masculine black images, who are making hit records using the hip-hop thing with melody.
But I also see television commercials selling products with the black voices and white faces, with the rap.
Look at George Michael.
I think it's a catch-22, Mr.
I don't think it's catch. I don't want it to be a eulogy.
House and not catch on fire.
I don't want it to be a eulogy. I wrote this book as what I call a call to arms. I'm saying, look, there's all these things going on that we could deal with. It's not like it's totally out of control yet. But if we continue this way, George Michael, there'll be more than one George Michael. George Michael went to #1 on the black chart this year. They got Sheena Easton out here trying to do the same thing. You're going to see more and more of it. As the music becomes more mechanical, more computerized, and the voices become less important, it's easier for you to market a white person doing black music.
So they are, in essence, you're saying, working themselves out of business.
What Pat Boone used to be, now George Michael is. And George Michael's better at it than Pat Boone was.
There are two people you have in your book who are modern-day heroes of mine. And one is Jack the Rapper, Jack Gibson, who put the first black station on the air in Atlanta and is a phenomenal person. And another is here with us, Eddie O.J. And Eddie O.J. was one of the one of the real mainstays who made the era, and you give him his
comes
due
from-
in your book.
Started in Cleveland, went to Buffalo, came to New York, Soul at Sunrise show. Used to listen to him every morning. This is my DJ, and it was a pleasure to write about him.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say along the same lines of your conversation that what we're really missing right now on radio, whether it be black or white radio, is personality. I think that's all been taken away. Someone to be on the air and be yourself and also mix with the community. Most of the DJs that you hear on the air right now, you never see them in the community itself.
Well, one thing's wrong with black radio, and I think is Eddie testified, is that there's no personality in the air. They want them to be mechanical. They want them to be replaceable because you can control them better. The black DJs, especially 60s, 70s, have become so powerful that the white owners and some of the black owners were threatened by them. Is that not true?
That's true. Absolutely.
Well, but you guys during your era were you were king of the hill. I mean, everything in the black community turned on the DJ. You could get people elected, unelected. You could sell products or not sell products. I mean, you could almost fire the station owner, couldn't you, at one point?
I'm guilty of that. But
I think a testimony to the power of black radio was when Dr. King was assassinated. The black DJs really, in many cases, kept many communities from exploding.
absolutely. When Dr. King was killed, many of us was on the air at the same time, created a situation whereby people were more cooler and didn't break in store windows and did the robbery and the things that took place before.
Eddie, let me ask you this question because our time is short.
Right.
You pioneered, you and the Jack the Rappers and all these other great men and women who are in Nelson George's book.
Right.
You made it possible for these black performers today to be where they are. You created the ground. You laid the foundation.
I like to think so.
Well, are you pleased? Are you happy? Are you
no.
happy to see us now, the best performers we have, not make music for us?
No, I'm very unhappy about that situation. You named a few of the favorite artists of mine, like Aretha Franklin and the rest of them. I'd like to see them back in the community once again so that the people who don't have a chance to go downtown at the arenas can get a chance to see them elsewhere. But the all-power dollar causes them to go where the big money is, and that's, again, crossover. No, I'm very unhappy about that.
Mr. George, you at Billboard are the editor of Black Music. I've seen awards and at the annual music awards and so forth. And by the way, I don't want to leave Wynton Marsalis out as someone who is very serious about preserving black music at great risk, I might add. But in your book, you delineate a scenario that has us culturally almost on the brink of destruction. I don't think many people know how integral and important music is to the continuity of their culture.
Well, the thing that made me, there's a phrase that I heard when I was very young, it was in the 60s, it was that if you listen to the music of black people, you'll know where black people are at any particular time. And when I thought about that, that's what made me write the book, because I felt right now we're at a crossroads. We have a quote-unquote black, upwardly mobile, puppy class, whatever you want to call them, who don't care very much about the people left behind. And they listen to Lionel Richie records, and they find that, and Whitney Houston to some degree, and find that vision, confirmed. And then you have the rap people who are left behind. Basically, rap music speaks for the people who are left behind. And the two worlds are not meeting at all. The black community I knew about, that I grew up upon, had the sense of everyone moving forward together. I don't think that sense is there right now. I think that the music is an integral part in making that happen again. And I'm hoping that as we move into the 90s, that some of this energy that's coming from the street, I see young entrepreneurs now coming into the industry from the street. I see new artists like Keith Sweat, et cetera, coming up from the street, who have this energy, the energy that I remembered from the soul men of the 60s and early 70s. I'm hoping that they can get in there and keep their vision. The problem is, over and over again, is that we get bought out.
Well, if as Eddie O.J. says, and as if you're inferring, the almighty dollar determines what music you sing and what dances you perform, then the only way I can see it changing is not from the souls and the hearts of people who are trying to make money, i.e. the artists, but from the community that becomes enlightened and buys music from certain people intentionally to make those people successful and
popular. They got to put pressure on them, because if not, these people live in cocoons. They're cocooned by the managers, the PR people, the record companies. And unless the community says that we don't like this and says we don't want these kind of images, they're going to continue on and on and on.
Well, we're not going to continue on and on. We've got about 20 seconds, and Eddie O'J is going to take us out.
Right. I like to say that the artists, no matter how popular they are, the better and the bigger they are, could make a demand for the record company to do these things to allow them to come back in the community. Let them pay for it.
That assumes a lot of things. Thank you very much. Thank you.